There we go. Welcome back to the Orthodox Ethos. I'm Father Peter Heers, and we are very glad today to have a special guest, Justino Carneiro. And if I'm saying it and pronouncing it correctly, we're very glad to have him. We're going to be talking about Romanity and Post-Modernity, of course, from an Orthodox perspective. Justino, thank you for joining us. It's a joy to have you.
Thank you, Father. As a longtime follower of your blessed work, it's a great honor to be with you and be able to talk about this topic.
Amen. So I'm in Greece on a 2-week trip, and you're in north of Portugal. Tell us a little bit about your background. We'll begin there, and then we'll get into the topic, which it's going to be probably a sprawling and interesting discussion because there's so many aspects. I was listening to some of your previous interviews, and I noticed in several of them that it was just kind of a very hard to contain because everything is so connected, whether you're talking about the history of the apostasy and the mystery of iniquity, or whether you're talking about the integral worldview of the Orthodox. It's so interconnected that it's very hard to stay narrowly on one aspect, which is, I think, the nature of the thing. But before we get into that, tell us a little about your work, your background, so people who aren't familiar with your work can know the context for today's discussion.
Yes, I am an academic scholar, researcher, and my background is in philosophy. So I'm very interested in these topics that we'll discuss today, but I'm not a historian. I should say that up front. I'm not a Romanist. I'm not a Byzantinist. So this issue, it's existential for me as an Orthodox Christian. In my PhD work that I'm elaborating still, I work on the theory of law and political theology by Carl Schmitt, who was a German jurist. Some people try to, pin him down to being a Nazi jurist, but the thing's not so clear like that, or so it cannot be reduced to that. In any case, it's interesting for an Orthodox Christian to confront his theories and the debates that he was involved in, because many of these debates were in the context of political theology were about precisely the Roman Empire and the Christianization of the Roman Empire and the role of theology related to politics. And my academic work focuses a lot on that, but of course I cannot. I don't have the neutrality sometimes that it's demanded from an academic researcher, because I cannot not speak and analyze these issues as an Orthodox Christian. I have.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we have you on the show today, because precisely we're interested in the Orthodox position, so we're happy that that's the case.
Yes, Father. Yes. I have published some work on this. There, I have a paper on Carl Schmitt, but also I have done some work in theology, in the realm of theology, in Orthodox theology, which is actually my main interest. But in academic terms, I also have this other work.
So did you grow up with the name Justin, or did you take it in honor of Saint Justin Popovich?
Yes, that's true. That's not my name at birth. It's my name at Orthodox birth. Yes.
And Saint Justine Popovich is your patron.
Yes, he is. Yes.
So that's another reason why I think we're drawn together today, because I've been following your work as well. Hugely influential in my development, going back 30 years, was Saint Justin's writings, which I pored over, and eventually led me to do my master's and PhD in dogmatic theology. And it's hard to underestimate the importance of Saint Justine. He's a great gift to the church in the 20th century. I
Absolutely.
hope to God that we can see his dogmatics in English soon. We have it in
Hmm.
Greek, but it'll be very helpful. So I could tell that your outlook is supremely patristic, and I'm sure that's been hugely influential. How long ago did you become Orthodox?
I was baptized in 2013.
Okay, so about 12 years now.
Yes, yes.
And are you also have been to Athens and you've met with Father Ioannis?
Yes, Father Ioannis Drongitis.
Yes.
I have lived in Athens for 5 years approximately. Uh,
Okay.
I was baptized there, and since then I was going there often, twice per
Άρα
year.
μιλάτε και ελληνικά.
Ναι, ναι.
Ωραία, ωραία. And so you read the patristic text in the original, or you rely on translations into Portuguese mostly?
No, yes, I'm able to read them. I'm not very, very proficient in Greek, but I have sufficient knowledge to read the fathers. I mean, at least to see where the translations go wrong, at least.
And
And
so we had an opportunity. I'm sure you probably saw our interviews with Father Ioannis about 2 years, 3 years ago,
yes,
um, which I would like to get back and do some more. But he was extremely insightful and is insightful to this day, but so helpful through the COVID insanity. If
yes,
so, for those of our listeners who've not watched those interviews or not watched other interviews with Father Ioannis, I highly recommend them.
yes,
And I'm very glad that he has been apparently somewhat influential with the faithful in Portugal. Somehow
yes.
it seems like there's a strong connection there.
There is, yes. Hmm.
Thank God.
Hmm. Yeah, my godfather he was living in Portugal. Now he's a monk at Caracalo, and he
Ah,
was a spiritual child. So we met through that connection, and slowly we developed a relationship, and with more people here in Portugal that have become Orthodox.
that's wonderful. Caracal is a wonderful monastery. I was just there for the feast day this year, and it's a beautiful place. Beautiful, beautiful place. Well, wonderful. So because I like to get to know you as well, not just to cut right to the chase, but so you're a professor, or you're finishing up your PhD, or you just finished it up. Where are you in your
I was
in
an
your
assistant professor. I was an assistant professor for 3 years. Then I moved to Greece with a scholarship. I was doing my research work there, more or less informally. I didn't have so many institutional connections in Greece. Um, but when COVID happened, or whatever COVID was, even politically and spiritually, as you have spoken very boldly about this also, it I can, how can I say it? I was obliged to deal existentially with this situation. So I got a bit off track in my studies. With that, doesn't mean that I didn't continue with the studies. I'm still working on a PhD. Hopefully, I will finish it this year.
very good.
Still, but it was how can I say? It was difficult to maintain this academic neutrality during that period. So I made a slight detour in order to understand a theoretical detour in order to understand the situation that we were living.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, COVID was terrible in some ways, but it's been very actually fruitful for the church if you judge it by its fruit, just by its fruit in terms of people coming to repentance, and then going and looking at the ultimate things, and then finding the Orthodox Church. I mean, we've never seen the kind of the numbers that we're seeing in the Orthodox Church in America right now. It's unprecedented in terms of Orthodox mission, Orthodox catechism. So I think that's definitely related to the post-COVID reality. So it's interesting because with every terrible event, the Lord takes the opportunity to bring about, at least in those who want repentance. My elder would often say, he would use the term, the devil is the ergo lavos of God. In other words, he's kind of the contractor. God allows him to do his machinations and then uses them. He kind of carries out a work in a way for God, whether he likes it or not, and God uses it for good for those who love him. So we saw that with COVID. You and I both were, diverted from the daily tasks before us, having to confront that. But obviously, it was very necessary, and it still is. I mean, I haven't seen the kind of spiritual fruit that could come if people would go back and really analyze what happened. We need still to do that, to repent of much of what happened during COVID. So let's pray that happens. But in any case, today our topic, which I think both of us are looking forward to discussing, we've called it Romanity and Post-Modernity. Why don't we start just with a basic definition or basic description of Romanity, because there is the textbook Western definition, which would just put it in the Western context. You could say it is having to do as much with the East as the West. But in our context, we're talking about Romanity in the full sense of the identity of a Roman post Constantine, post Theodosius. How would you describe it?
Yes.
How would you describe Romanity for people who've never heard of it?
Yes. So I think some fathers have spoken about the Roman empires having been providential for the dissemination of the gospel, and there's also this whole debate about what were the reasons why Saint Constantine adopted Christianity, if there was some kind of instrumental motives there. But all of these theories reject the vision that he had of the cross at the Milvian bridge at the decisive point in his rule as a Roman emperor. So it was God that not only, as it is expressed, for instance, in the Doxastikon of the Vespers of Nativity, that it speaks about the census of Augustus and the providential character or momentum of the birth of Christ in the Roman Empire, and the unification of the empire by one man, in that case Augustus, and later, as the fathers say, that what was in potentiality in Augustus was realized by Saint Constantine. The end of wars and strife, the pacification of the Roman Empire that made it possible for the gospel to be spread. And so it's not that there was a metaphysical necessity in the Roman Empire. This can be seen a bit in the theories of Origen and Eusebius of Caesarea. It's kind of slight confusion between the providential character of the Roman Empire and its metaphysical structure, like the analogy between the monarchy of God and the monarchy of the empire. But for the fathers, it wasn't really this. It was more economic, in the sense of the divine economia.
Yeah, the providence of God brought it about such that this would be used for the gospel.
Yes. So there are in this from this perspective, there are some characteristics of the Roman Empire that had an affinity with Christianity. For instance, the equality before the law, the absence of despotic rule or arbitrary rule of the kings or the emperors, but ultimately this was realized in the Christian Roman Empire that started first with the Edict of Milan, in the liberation of the end of the persecutions of the Christians, Then with the Council of Nicaea, of course, the First Ecumenical Council, and then after Saint Constantine with Saint Theodosius, first with the Edict of Thessalonica, where orthodoxy was recognized as being part, or I mean, it was declared as being the lawful religion of the empire, and heresy was denied as being the work of madmen. These are the words of the edict. And then immediately after, with the Second Ecumenical Council, after a period where Arianism had already been rejected as a dogmatic confession of faith by the Orthodox Church in the First Ecumenical Council, but there were some problems. After Constantine, there was can I say a regress, or with Julian the Apostate, but then it was really with Saint Theodosius that the Roman Empire was declared as being officially confessing the Orthodox faith.
Mm-hmm. So at this time, when now Emperor Theodosius makes essentially, maybe in the words of Father John Romanides, takes the church and puts it as the healing center throughout the empire and recognizes it as the heartbeat, let's say, of the new Christian reality in the Roman Empire. From that point forward, having in mind contemporary life, how would we talk about the essence of Romanity that's relevant to us today? Over the next 1,000 years, really, we have a merging of the Christian faith with the Roman Empire, but and the Roman ethos, so to speak, and forming it and shaping it. So then you can't talk about, eventually, do we not get to a point where you really can't, in time and space, you can't talk about Christianity apart from its, let's say, incarnation or inculturation within the Roman Empire. So even after the fall of Rome in 1453, and throughout the Turkish period, the identity of the Christians, at least in the Ottoman Empire, still remains Roman. They're referred to by the Turks as Romans. And so that obviously is not just a political reality. And it has something to do with our identity today. I mean, that's why we're talking about it, because we're facing, in this postmodern, we also probably want to define terms for people. What do we mean? What do we understand as Orthodox? What is post-modernity? But in this, these end times, these last days, these days of gross apostasy and the rise of the and the materialization of the spirit of Antichrist, we especially all of us converts, we're looking not to just become Orthodox in some superficial way, adopting the doctrines. We want to go deep into the phronema and the ethos of the church. And I would say that ultimately we have to come to terms with this whole question of the identity that was formed over that 1,000 years, and it really has come down to us. And you can see in some of the greatest saints of the church. So we need to maybe try to get our hands on some characteristics of Romanity. We could maybe help people by saying, well, what it's not. Maybe we'll start there. What was lost in the West over time, which was not automatic, right? It wasn't going to be necessarily that they were doomed because of the legalism of Rome, or whatever might be in the baggage of the tribes or whatever in Europe, but it was lost. How would you want to help the listeners to understand the difference that we're shaking off, and we're trying to shake off certain ways of thinking and being to become truly Orthodox in our way of life? I think that's what I'm interested in talking about. Ultimately.
Yes, I think that he cannot, after so many years, cannot be dissociated from Romanity. And I don't believe that Orthodoxy, it's completely neutral in terms of political worldview. This doesn't mean that the church is political by itself, but in an originary sense of polis, of the polis, and what is political in the sense of human community. There are many marks that were adopted by the church from the Roman Empire, but also the Roman characteristics themselves were transfigured by the church. And really, like you said, you touched on a very important point, I would say, that Father John Romanidis mentions, and I think it's a very apt description of what was the purpose of the adoption of Christianity and Orthodoxy by the Roman Empire, which was really a therapeutic method. It was not this, like he says, like he insists, a metaphysical, speculative theology, but a practical way of life with a therapeutical scope. And he says that the Roman emperors and the Roman aristocracy saw that, and he makes this analogy with modern psychiatry. Doesn't mean that modern psychiatry is legitimized because of that, but we can see that analogy, like for the well-being of the Roman citizens, the Roman elite saw that orthodoxy was a very essential instrument of therapy that could contribute to the well-being of the empire. And so, in this sense, later it was developed the theory of the symphony of powers, the so-called symphony of powers, which was put into law by Justinian, the Emperor Justinian as well, of a collaboration between the empire and the church, without the conflict, like this institutional conflict, it would emerge in the West, between the Pope and the Emperor. This never existed because the how can I say, the competences were distinct and separate, and the Roman Empire itself had a practical dimension. It was never, sacralized, let's say, in itself. It was considered to be something that came before Christianity. It was blessed and made holy by Christianity, but it had the political element was never reduced itself to a sacral element, as it would happen in the West as well, where the empire, the different, mostly Germanic empires, themselves as political powers pretended to have in themselves a holy nature. So this never existed in the East, even though it was blessed by the church, blessed by God, but still it was kept within its boundaries. And I would say that what was consecrated by this symphony of powers was really love of God and love of neighbor. That in the purpose of the Roman Empire, in its administrative elements, military, also was to protect the church in order for the Roman citizens to be able to live their Orthodox Christian lives in peace, and to produce saints that could guide also the saints through this structure of symphony, the empire itself, according to the will of God. So I think this is the basic elements of this symphony between Romanity and Christianity that was developed in the East, and that indeed was lost in the West by the conquest of the Franks, in particular the Carolingian Franks, that had this pretension to constitute a rival empire to the Romans in the East. This, of course, after the fall of Rome. But there's also an excessively schematic in historiography view of this of the fall of Rome and the period of the late antiquity and early Middle Ages, because Romanity was not lost in the West. It still survived as a culture. Even there were many attempts at reconquering the Western provinces, namely by Justinian with his general Belisarius. So it wasn't, you cannot have a clear-cut separation there in between the West and the East. There was always a connection. There was always transferences and relationships between West and East. But this changed precisely with the Frankish Empire and the Frankish conquests after the Germanic invasions. Mostly, what unified the West in a new rule and a new empire was the Frankish Empire, starting with Charlemagne, mostly. And this had theological consequences, of course, through first the heresy of the Filioque, and then later with the heresy of papism, or papalism. That was a consequence of the Frankish mentality as well.
Really, today, when we talk about Europe, what we mean is Charlemagne's Europe, and never, yes, and not, I mean, it was totally shaped post-schism. And I think this is one of the great tragedies of the Western reality, is that they have lost all sense of the true history, pre-Reformation history, and how that whole distortion of Christianity was incubated from the 11th to the 15th centuries, and then gave birth to 1,000 little popes. That's lost on the vast majority of people who are seeking today. You encounter it again and again. The dichotomy is Reformed or Papal, when it should be really Papal Protestants and Reformed Protestants are two sides of the same coin, and both of them are the opposite, or the distortion of the church for the first millennium, or really 2 millenniums. So much of our experience is really a Charlemagne's Europe and Protestant, Papal, or Reformed Christianity. So that's what we're coming to, and we're looking, even as Orthodox, I think many times in the West, we're looking at our own identity, the Christian identity, through those lens. And so, is it just what is the what are some of the defining factors there that you would say are sets Romanity, true Romanity, apart from whatever we're going to call the distortion in the West, the Frankish form of Christianity, or the Reformed or Protestant? What are some of the characteristics you think that, before we go on to talk about other aspects of the topic and modernity, can we put some identity? What is it that is differentiated? Obviously, the phronema and the ethos on a dogmatic plane. So we talk about some of the major dogmatic errors in the West, but is there something else that we can say characterizes the Roman, truly Roman outlook?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think that, for instance, theology itself was reduced to speculative metaphysics by the Franks, and this had a major impact. I mean, it represented really the loss of the real Orthodox, authentic Orthodox theology, which, like Father John Normandy says, is an empirical theology. Practical theology, it's praxis, and theoria and theosis. It's not this both the moralistic and legalistic view of theology and canon law, ecclesiology, and this speculative metaphysical kind of theology that was developed by the Franks that led to scholasticism. So,
I mean, maybe give an example of that. I mean, like Anselm is another world in terms of theology, right? It's like from outer space with regard to patristic, because it's very theoretical and legalistic, and compared to a Saint Simon New Theologian, for instance. Somebody wanted to go and see at the turn of the millennium, you had a towering new theologian, Simeon, who's talking as a true theologian experientially, and how different that is from an Anselm or a scholastic. Would that be a good comparison for someone to understand the differences?
yeah, absolutely. And I think that the formation or the appearance of someone like Saint Simeon, the new theologian, was really the purpose of Romanity and the symphony of powers between the Roman Empire and the Church. Um, yes, that so Saint Simeon is really the example of what it is, an empirical theologian in the sense of Father John Romanides.
We talk about Saint Simeon the theologian, brings to mind Saint Simeon the stylite, and how the emperors would go sit at the bottom of his pillar, and would be they would be guided by the prophetic and clairvoyant voices of these angels in the flesh. So you have, whether in the 5th or 6th century, or whether in the 10th or 11th century, you have these towering figures that really are at crucial times the guiding hand. God using them to guide them through the iconoclasm or the Latin captivities or whatever it might be. So they're I liked what you said. It's kind of the point, right? I mean, that's what ultimately. Did they have that consciously? Did even the political? I mean, certainly we have a lot of emperors who were not virtuous, right? Because they're free. But let's say in the best case scenario, did the emperors, did the political class have the conscious, understanding that this exists, this whole endeavor, this whole enterprise of empire building, ultimately it exists for the sake of producing a Simeon? Do you think that was conscious on the part of the Romans?
Yes, I lost you for a little bit. Yes, yes. Because the emperors and the Roman aristocracy, they had, not all of them, of course, but many of them had a strong relationship with the church. They had spiritual fathers. They took counsel from the saints and the bishops of the church, the patriarchs. So absolutely, it was a conscious relationship. So, of course, sometimes fallible. There were many emperors that were heretics. But in the best moments of the Roman Empire, that relationship was really realized. So I would say so, yes, for sure.
So we have that juxtaposition, or that the dichotomy between the academic theologian, which really, if we talk about modernity now, has even among some of the Orthodox, we're in a crisis period, in my opinion, right now. We're in a major crisis period. We're going to hit the wall soon with a worldwide crisis, probably a world war. And of course, the fruit of all that is the spiritual apostasy, always, like the spiritual condition of mankind, and the apostasy of the Christians, first and foremost, is what allows for world wars and calamity. So we're going to hit the wall here pretty soon, and it's not a surprise that when we think of theologians, the vast majority of people today, we think of academic theologians. In fact, bishops go to academic theologians for guidance many times, in my experience. But certainly, if you look at the Vatican II in the West, the academic theologians dominated in their latest and greatest and most destructive council of Vatican II. The defining voices were academic theologians like Yves Congar or others. So that's not an accident, right? That's not an accident. When you have a allotrius, you have a distortion at the heart of the church, and you think a theologian is one who speculates, then you've got a major crisis, and the church is no longer functioning to produce saints. And the church, in the East never had academic theologians as their guides. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes. And it's interesting to see that it starts precisely in the West with this distortion of Christianity in the West, the rise of scholasticism, which transpired also in the East, as we know. Like you mentioned, the period of Saint Simeon the New Theologian, but immediately after, we have many examples. But even before, and it's interesting to see that the importance for today of the Eighth Ecumenical Council and the Ninth Ecumenical Council, that were really confronting this how can I say, this distortion of the phronima coming from the West, and with some figures like John Italos, that was condemned in the Synodicon of Orthodoxy in the 11th century. He was a disciple of Michael Psellos as well, that had this kind of neo-pagan philosophical approach to theology as well. But then it comes really to a crisis in the period of the Ninth Ecumenical Council with St. Gregory Palamas and his opponents, of course. So, and I would take the chance to congratulate you for having published the Acts of the Eighth Ecumenical Council, which is so important for many of these issues.
Thank God, thank God. And you were really pointing to the next person in mind when you said, in my mind, after Saint Simeon the Theologian is Saint Gregory Palamas. He was at the let's say the base of the mountain of modernity in many ways, right? And he pointed out the coming where they're going, and it's very interesting today that we have, by providence of God, which we did not have in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries, except among the saints like Saint Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain. We didn't have a conscious allegiance. It doesn't seem like that outside of certain circles, certainly not in academic theology in the 20th century, to Palamas, to the great Hesychus, to the great Ninth Ecumenical Council or councils. And we have to thank people like George Mandarides or Father John Romanides or others in Thessaloniki, really, who brought Palamas, St. Gregory Palamas, back to the forefront of our consciousness. And in terms of studying theology, obviously they were always there in the second Sunday of Lent and in the Synaxarion and among the saints, but it wasn't guiding our academic theologians in any way. And so St. Gregory Palamas, so vastly important for us to understand what you're talking about here. So between the Eighth and the Ninth Ecumenical Councils, and those are kind of like two pillars that are the answer to not only papal Protestantism, but so much of modernity in the apostasy that we're seeing here. I mean, because you go from the Filioque and you end up with Barlaam, right? That's the process there, and that's still the defining factors in many ways for the West. I mean, they're clinging to these two heretical stances to their own detriment. So I'm just trying to give our listeners a sense of what it is that is our task in order to acquire the Orthodox phronema and ethos and to really understand Romanity. That's on the theological, spiritual level. What else can we discuss before we go to some more? I want to define some things as well that'll help people to face the contemporary situation, the apostasy that's happening.
Yes, but yeah, so I would say that some people don't have this awareness, maybe most of us, that the Roman Empire continued up to early modernity. The fall of Constantinople was in the 15th century, where the Council of Florence happened before. There was this movement of passage from these neo-pagan so-called Byzantine thinkers like Gemistos Plethon to the West, taking philosophy to the West, and this informed the Renaissance. So it's incredible to see that the difference, the huge difference that existed at that period in the 15th century between the nascent Renaissance thinkers that had this idea of return to antiquity, to this pagan knowledge and wisdom embodied in the philosophers, of course, after those centuries of distortion by scholasticism, and the inheritors of St. Gregory Palamas, namely a few patriarchs even, that were hesychasts, and that they went on after the fall of Constantinople, having a big influence in the Roman people, the Roman peoples that survived the fall of Constantinople and who were under the new rule of the Turks. And it's really amazing, and people don't have this awareness. For sure, in the West and even among the Orthodox, it's not so clear that the Romanity survived. It as a state, it went up to the 15th century. We have this idea that Romanity something from antiquity, but it's not. It traversed the Middle Ages, it reached early modernity. And so all the seeds of development of the Western civilization were already there. So I think it's so important to how can I say, to study and to really understand what was being formulated and codified, let's say, in the 8th and the 9th ecumenical councils that can inform our views today. But I think that ultimately it's really hesychasm that represents it's the last, how can I say, the last message of the dogmatic consciousness of the Roman Empire to Orthodox Christians and really to all Christians.
So that's exactly right, and one of the areas that's most misunderstood. I remember when I was on my way to Orthodoxy, and spent about a year studying before I was received back in 1992, and I was talking to some Roman Catholics at the time, and they said, "Oh yes, well there's this heresy, it's called Quietism," and of course what they meant is hesychasm, and I think there was a heresy in the West called Quietism, and they just identified hesychasm and Quietism. And this idea of Quietism is kind of like just ignore the world, ignore the society. You just keep to yourself. And so to this day, it seems like whenever we talk about hesychasm, there's this attempt to make it a movement or something of the 14th century, an anomaly or an innovation even. So two words from your understanding of why hesychasm is just the ancient ascetic core of the church, that was always present from even St. Anthony or even earlier from the Desert Fathers till today. How would you present or just say this is what hesychasm is for the Western man?
Yeah, so I would say that's synonymous with what we were speaking about before, the therapeutic theology of the church. That's hesychasm. It's the cure of the nous, of the fallen nous in man by the church and by the saints and the elders of the church, the illuminated elders of the church. And so that's really the practical purpose of our life as Orthodox Christians, I would say, and not this moralistic approach or intellectual, speculative approach, but really hesychasm, this praxis, this mystagogic way of life of the church that is embodied in hesychasm. And of course, this is the how can I say, the essence of any political orientation and cultural orientation. If we don't have the guidance of the saints, and if we don't strive for this illumination also at the feet of the saints and by their teaching and guidance, there's no there's no way that our politics and cultural life will be pleasant to God. And I think we are very stuck in these in some false dichotomies that were created by the West, and we lose sight of really this basis of our all human orientation, including politics and culture and all of these things.
There's so many aspects in the discussions between contemporary Catholicism and Orthodoxy that point to a total misunderstanding. For instance, when we talk about the ecumenical councils, Father John Romanity points out there can be no ecumenical council without the deified, without those who are in theosis or on the path and illumination. And the legalistic, moralistic approach of many, they can't. I don't think they can get their head around that. Why that's the case? How every generation and every dogmatic, let's say, challenge to the church's, what the boundaries of the faith have come down to us are. You have these towering figures who had achieved theosis. In other words, they were healed. They had passed through the therapeutic program. They had arrived at divine illumination, and they were like God, right? Because the whole point of our life is to go from the image to the likeness, and the likeness is theosis. And so the restoration of Adam in Christ, it leads to this total likeness in this life, with acquiring all the virtues. And so the one who has achieved that has the discernment of spirits. And so he can then rightly divide the word of truth, and his word finds, let's say, rest in the souls of all the others in the church. And those are the ones who define the councils, like St. Gregory Palamas. He becomes the voice of the church, or St. Mark of Ephesus, or whoever it might be in every age. And so that's just one little, I think, aspect that, again, points to people, well, we have this chasm because they look at it so legalistically, so institutionally, if you like. They make the chair as if it somehow magically sanctifies the one who sits in it. Mm-hmm. And it's the opposite. If the one who comes to the chair does not have the life and the illumination and is not glorified, the chair will probably be under his condemnation, yes, because it's now a responsibility he cannot carry. I mean, that's the crisis of every heretical age, when we have councils like Hyria before the Seventh Ecumenical, where you had hundreds and hundreds of bishops who, for whatever reason, had assumed responsibility for the church without being able to carry it out because they didn't have the spiritual qualifications. And so they sat in those chairs under their condemnation, confessing heresy. So this is a massively different understanding of what it means to be an authority. What is authority in the church? Another massive difference, right, between the East and the West.
Yes, and there's always this search for the ultimate source of authority, right? Whether it be the Pope or the Council. But even in the liturgical tradition of the Church, we don't commemorate the councils; we commemorate the fathers of the councils. So it's really the consensus of the illuminated fathers that reaches dogmatic expression in the councils, in the true Orthodox councils. So the source of authority is really God, who speaks through the saints and through the consensus of the saints. Because in the realm of terminology and linguistic expression, there are many differences. There are possibly many differences, but when the church faces heresy, the saints come together and express their experience through dogmatic terms, ori, right? Dogmatic boundaries, and this is bequeathed to the church as an expression of its dogmatic consciousness. So we know that whatever deviates from those formulations is not Orthodox, doesn't lead to salvation, doesn't lead to illumination, doesn't lead to theosis. Mm-hmm. And this is lost to many people, of course, in the search to find this legalistic ultimate source of authority. But really, I think the Orthodox consciousness always kept this this notion very present.
And what kept Romanity going under the Ottoman rule? Could we say it is essentially the hesychastic therapeutic program and the continuation and incarnation in the various saints that were produced? Largely at the center of that was Mount Athos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course.
For the part of the Orthodox Church that was in the former Roman Empire, and that would, but really the entire church was rejuvenated through Athos. I mean, Saint Paisius Velikoski, the fathers who basically the 19th century Renaissance, so to speak, in Russia, in the monasteries, were largely due to Saint Paisius Velikoski, who came from Athos.
Yes.
So that's something that you have something to say. You told me earlier about the preservation of Romanity under the Muslim rule in the Iberian Peninsula, which I'm sure most of us have no idea about. I'd like to hear that.
And this is a previous period, because this was before the Frankish conquest. But it's very important for me and for us here in Portugal, for us Orthodox, this period, because the Christians came under Muslim rule, because they came from the north of Africa, and they conquered the Iberian Peninsula, what is nowadays Portugal and Spain. But the Christians themselves survived, and many of these there were many saints that we commemorate to this date in the Synaxarium up to the 11th century. And it's interesting to see that when, with the so-called Reconquista, the Franks came and conquered the Iberian Peninsula, this ethos of Romanity and whatever remained of Orthodoxy was lost. And there is an interesting parallel there with the East, what happened after the Ottoman conquest, because even, well, we know there's this famous phrase that the East Romans preferred the turban of the Sultan than the papal tiara, because before that there was the danger of uniatism, and it went on, this danger, in many Romans, so-called Greeks, that survived under the Ottoman rule, but they had many. They were getting their education in Italy, in Florence, in Padua, and Venice, and they were very Westernized from that time on, after the fall of Constantinople. But there was always, even if there was a lot of infiltration in the East through this Westernized mentality, if they were not Catholics or Papists, they were Uniates. But there was a lot of resistance, mostly coming from Mount Athos, that reached this great point with the Colivades, the Colivades fathers, and that they compiled the Philokalia. So we see that even there, the church expressed its own consciousness through the compilation of the Philokalia, which is really the basis of hesychasm. And it's always like that. And as you referred to, after Russia, which had its own problems through Westernization after Peter the Great, and the Kiev school in Ukraine that Father George Florovsky called Western captivity. But there was this influence also of hesychasm coming from the Holy Mountain through St. Paisius Velikoski, and with the resurgence that you mentioned in Russia as well.
Mm-hmm.
So we see always the same pattern, that hesychasm, it's really the main expression of the church, and all other forms are pseudomorphosis.
And you can say we can see it right up to this very day, because right now we're experiencing a period not unlike in the wake of the Colivades fathers and St. Paisios, which you saw this fruit in Russia. We're seeing something from the 60s, 70s, 80s. The fruit of that now we're living in from the disciples, the life of St. Paisios, St. Porphyrios, Elder Ephraim, St. Ephraim of Katonikia, all these Athonite fathers that are really towering figures right now. And they brought about a kind of maybe short-lived, we'll see what happens, renaissance and rejuvenation of the, and again, Athos rejuvenates the church. Elder Ephraim with 20 monasteries in America, or 17 monasteries in America. And so you see the same pattern again and again, and the same temptation again and again, which is this secularizing spirit, this worldly spirit, this academic theology, this philosophized and speculative theology that comes mainly from the West for the last 1,000 years. And so it comes down to us again and again. And what, from whatever you can say, can we look into the West and what remained of Orthodoxy and Romanity in the West after the schism? Do we see streams of it that we can identify?
Yeah, so that's an interesting topic as well, because there's maybe a misunderstanding of what Father John Romanidis, for instance, thought of the French Revolution, or what he meant by his analysis of the French Revolution, because he shows that the peoples that were liberated, to some extent, of course, we can speak about what kind of liberation was that, but the peoples that were liberated in the French Revolution were the descendants of the Gallo-Romans. And it's interesting that see that even the Enlightenment thinkers, they had this idea that, like, going against the Frankish idea of one king, one rule. No, sorry, one king, one church, one people. They were saying, no, that we have the nobility is the Enlightenment thinkers were saying the nobility is Frankish, so it's not Gallia, it's not Gaul, it's Francia. The church is Rome, they were saying, meaning the papal church, and the peoples are the Gauls. So they were making this distinction, but even the idea that they had of the Gauls, so the people, was not Christian. It was like this anachronistic idea of the Celts, or the peoples before Romanization and before Christianization, and this manifests in so many things, even in the idea of Byzantium and in modern Greece as well. There's a striking parallel there, because the Greeks in their modern education nowadays, they are taught that there's a hole in their history, that their identity goes back to antiquity, the Greek antiquity, and they have this westernized perception also of the Middle Ages, so-called Byzantium, and then they leap to the 19th century with the foundation of the modern Greek state. But really, the Greeks are the descendants of the Romans, the most, what can I say, the most prototypical Romans that were survived under Turkish occupation, and that were liberated in the Greek Revolution.
This is something that, if I can jump in, is very instructive for what we're trying to achieve here today, and that is to discern the difference between Romanity and where is Romanity in our history and in our consciousness, and where is it not? Where is it not? If you go back to the Greek Revolution, what's startling, many people don't even know, many Greeks don't even know, is that, first of all, the consciousness of those who are struggling for the liberation from the Ottomans, the leaders, was consciously to return to Romanity. They had no interest to become Europeans, at least some of the great heroes. And when they were liberated, when the liberation came, and they were then under a Bavarian, and they were being the monasteries were being closed down forcefully throughout the kingdom in the 1830s. They said, this fate is worse than the Ottomans. so they what many people don't understand is that there was basically a coup d'état post-Ottoman, post-Greek Revolution over the Greek people. And to this day, the fruits of that are very, very evident. Again, the Western powers struggled greatly not to allow Romanity to resurface. The very revolutionary impetus came from the West. I mean, at least the organization, not the heroes. The so-called Friends Society was a Masonic type society. Yes. And they were infiltrated by people of the West, the minds of people like Corais, who was a total humanist, and they wanted to return or make Greece into essentially a new reality, which it had not been for 1700 years, and that is to go back pre-Christ and have as their model the pagan Greeks. And to this day, when you go to Athens, what's at the center of the tourist attraction? It's the pagan monuments. All of that was a system. It was intentional. It was politically driven, and it was opposed by the great heroes of the day. Some of them became martyrs. They were imprisoned. I mean, people don't know we don't know our history. I didn't know this, of course, until I came and lived in Greece for 20 years, and little by little by little, I learned from probably a small portion of the society, frankly, knows this. Yes. We're sold, like Americans are sold a certain version of their founders, right? Mm-hmm. Again, delusional, it's propaganda for the sake of the state. Some of it's not untrue, of course, but some of it is distorted, and they focus on what they want to focus on, as if the Enlightenment thinkers were expressing Christianity in the West, and the same thing in Greece. And so you have young people growing up for the last 150 years in Greece with essentially propaganda to convince them that this new version of Greece is actually their identity. And you go to the Greeks abroad in America, and they have the same delusion. It is exactly not that. And so Romanity is fought tooth and nail. Do not allow it to come back. Do not allow it to express across the Orthodox world, to unite the Orthodox. That was the number one goal of the West, not to allow the Orthodox to be reunited, to Constantinople to be reborn, and for Romanity to return to the because it was their shame for hundreds and hundreds of years. Constantinople and everything that was going on, it was a burden on the Western apostates. So a lot of that is just totally unknown. And yet here you can see clearly the heroes of Romanity, the great saints who fought against Corais, like Saint Athanasius of Paros. Saint Athanasius of Paros, a phenomenal, towering figure. He was fought tooth and nail against by the establishment and defrocked. He was defrocked by the hierarchy. And of course, he was restored, and now he's glorified as a saint. But we don't remember the Kolivadis fathers were fought terribly, and we even have martyrs among the Kolivadis fathers. Two monks were killed by other deluded monastics or some kind of agents, and so you have this struggle. We need to learn this struggle, because this is our identity. I mean, I'm talking about the Western convert needs to know this history to understand who we are, and not to be confused by the various distorted versions that have been shoved upon us by westernizing, ecumenizing forces, even within the Orthodox Church. Sorry for the rant, but I just wanted to get that out as you were saying that, because it's so instructive, I think, what we've faced since the time of the revolution.
Yes, indeed. So yeah, so the Greek Revolution tragically was the victory at least at the state level of the Westernizers in Greece through the vision of Korais mainly and others, not of the heroes of Romeosini, which is the Greek name for Romanity.
Yes.
But always, especially with the Holy Mountain at the center, there's always resistance, like you said, from the '60s as well. There's this revival of orthodoxy and hesychasm. So even though it's a minority, I think that hopefully and thank God that there's this awareness also in Greece from many people still,
Hmm.
and that they can teach us Romanity. They can
Tell
teach
us
us.
what can Romanity teach us with regard to the contemporary. And we can talk about this as well. How legitimate it is. This whole question of ethnicism, philotism, and Romanity. I mean, is Romanity meant an empire which had many ethnic groups, and yet
Yes.
they were all united in one identity, which would have been the Orthodox faith and the Roman Empire, and what it meant to be a Roman. They didn't
Yes.
lose their identity of, let's say, the Greeks in Attica, or the I don't know what other ethnic groups we can cite, different parts of the empire. They were local ethnic groups. There were patriarchs who were Latins. I mean, there was, maybe we should talk about that ideal and then juxtapose it with the struggle with ethnicism, which is a big part of the Roman identity, because Orthodoxy is known, I think wrongfully, as being a very ethnic centered, distorted reality in the Western world.
Yes. Yeah. So the world of Romeosini, Romanity, was prior to this nationalistic division of ecclesial jurisdictions. Um, some authors have spoken of a Byzantine Commonwealth, like Dimitri Obolensky, and we can take issue a bit with the name Byzantine, but what he describes there is it's interesting because he shows that after the fall of Constantinople and with the system of millet of the Turkish millet, the millet means nation, so that were many nations, but they were all Rum, and at the center they had the Patriarch of Constantinople. Mainly, it was the four Eastern patriarchates, but also the Romanian principalities and the Serbs and the Bulgarians. So there was this commonwealth. It remained, which is really it's Romeosini. It's Romanity. This cultural communal way of life that survived under the Turkish rule, and that later in the 19th century, after the national revolutions, formed these national churches. But still, the unity was there, and it's interesting to see that how that unity was centered in what we know identify as the Greek tradition or Byzantine tradition. And those, even though there were some national resentments against the Phanariots, for instance, in Romania or in other places, they
Bulgaria.
always, yes, they always
Yeah.
looked to the Romans, the Romi. It's interesting to see that how we always have difficulties with the terms for people to understand what we are speaking about, because
Yeah.
okay, we're speaking about the Greeks, but they were the Romi, the Romans. They were always called Romans. But not only the Greeks, but also the Eastern peoples that still today in Syria and Lebanon, uh,
Yes.
other places in Asia Minor, they are Rum Christians. And it is in these peoples that Romanity lasted and survived. And so I think this is my opinion, but the way I see it, it's really it's the how can I say, the birthright of Orthodoxy, that it's being expressed by these peoples from whom we can learn culturally, but of course mostly from their saints and from the people that you mentioned, like Elder Ephraim and others, from Saint Paisios and Saint Porphyrios, and many of them coming from places in Asia Minor, from precisely these places that are not considered the typical Greek continental civilization now, a modern state.
Yeah, yeah. On that point, let me just add that in. Don't lose your train of thought. I was in Cyprus a couple of times now in the last few years, and visiting with people there, including Metropolitan Neophytos, and he spoke to us quite a bit about, the Anatolites, the Easterner, and what he meant by that was not the Far Easterner or the Middle Easterner, but the Roman Romios, or the Anatolites, the one from Asia Minor, and that really Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, true Christianity, is an Eastern, both like ethos, culture. I don't know how you want to put it, but it carries within it the soul deeply is Eastern. It's not European. It's not Western. And what we mean by that is not a geographical or an ethnic category. We're talking about a spiritual, let's say, expression and mindset. And things like philotimo, which St. Paisios talks about, or other things that characterize the Eastern or Asia Minor outlook and phronema. And truly, when you go to a place like Cyprus, which is still, I think, more than any place in the Greek world, it's got still a feel. It's got a different feel. Greece has less of that. You can still find it, but it's definitely been systematically Europeanized. I mean, it's a program for many, many years to transform it into a corner of Europe, whereas Cyprus, I think, has maintained its identity more forcefully, at least with its suffering. Because when suffering happens, people cling to their identity, and it's shaped and it's forged in the fire of persecution. And so Cyprus, for 50 years being separated, many people being refugees, you've got this sense of the cross and of the suffering, which is at the heart of the church. So it's fascinating how that materializes, and you can see it. Like you can feel. It's hard to put into words, though. I'm struggling to put it in words right now. It's hard for me to do that, but you can see the difference between that and then some of the clergy that you would meet in Greece today, and you feel, I don't know, maybe coldness is the word, as opposed to a warmth. That's one way to put it, but it's a real thing. It's like, it's not just, we're not just talking, history, politics. This is still a very real reality and it's not an accident that Saint Paisios was from Asia Minor, and Saint Iakovos was from Asia Minor, and Saint Elder Hieronymus, Saint Hieronymus from Aegina, was from Asia Minor. Elder Arsenios with Saint Joseph the Hesychast from Asia Minor. You have, Cappadocia. You have this unbelievable Christianity. If you ever want to see the heart of Asia Minor Cappadocian Christianity, just in a few paragraphs, it's remained with me since I read it 25 years ago. In the life of Elder Hieronymus of Aegina, he talks about how they lived before, of course, he left and went to Constantinople, and then he went to Aegina, and how they lived, how laymen lived in the villages of Cappadocia is another level. There's another level of Christianity, like something like, out of the Synaxarion, for not monks, not bishops or priests, no, just the average layman, how they lived out the Christian life. So just as an, experiential yes to what you're saying with regard to that point.
Yes, I agree totally. And nowadays there's this attempt to revive the Western Orthodox tradition, Christian tradition, but we cannot ignore that that Orthodoxy survived and was cultivated in the East, and it's from there that we received it.
Yeah, it's a whole nother. We
Not
could
from,
talk all night on this one. Yeah, that's another part of the struggle for the
yes,
Western convert.
yes. So we received the tradition organically from our fathers, not from bookish reconstructions or. But
Yes.
even if we are inevitably Westerners to some extent, it's we need to receive this the tradition from our fathers that mostly come from the East, and the Western expression will be something natural. Will be natural consequences that we don't need to think so much about it. I would say we're enter some reconstructions of what it is to be a Western Orthodox Christian. This is a natural outcome from that reception, that living reception of the tradition.
There's an inconvenient truth that we all have to accept, and that is that the very meaning of paradosis, tradition, is to pass on from one living human being to another.
Yes.
That's it. There's no other way, because they were eyewitnesses of the word, and that's why they had authority. And that's
Yes.
why that's what John talks about in his epistles, the Apostle John. And that's why it was the authority was the apostles, their disciples, and those who knew the apostles. They were commemorated immediately, and that's how it's always been. Who knew the saints, and what did the saints teach them? That you, to this day, when you go to Mount Athos, you go to those sources, you go to those people who knew Saint Paisius, who knew Saint Porphyrius, who knew Elder Joseph, and they're the ones that you want to talk to, or the ones who are now becoming the new Saint Paisius or Saint Joseph's. So you can't. There's no substitute for that. I'm going to go read about what the church did in 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. Of course, we're going to read the lives of the saints of the Celtic or the Asia or the British Isles. They were Orthodox 100%, and they teach us through their lives. And of course, we're going to commemorate, we're going to venerate, we're going to make pilgrimages, we're going to rebuild their churches, we're going to venerate their memory. But don't forget that what they're experiencing has nothing to do with heterodoxy. It has nothing to do with the last 1,000 years of the apostate West. It's exactly because they were Romi in many ways, right? The same spirit, the same ethos of. It's very striking how close the Celtic saints are to the Desert Fathers or to the Athenites. It's that unity of experience is what has to be experienced today by all of us, and that's passed on by human beings.
Yes, yes. And we cannot understand what really those saints lived, how they lived, and what their lives were if we don't see living examples of
Yes.
this. So even through the witness and through meeting the living examples of the faith nowadays, we can understand also the saints of the past living in the West. I mean, Father Seraphim Rose, he near the end of his life, he was very interested in this work of understanding and reviving the veneration of the Western saints. And he called attention to this fact that it's only through the examples that we can understand really the saints of the West. And it's
By the way,
in
you
the
brought up
light,
Father Seraphim. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Forgive
in,
me.
in the light of the living examples that we can understand the Western saints from antiquity.
Exactly. And because, I mean, haven't they been read in Britain? I mean, weren't they reading about St. Patrick for the last 800 years? They had those written lives in Ireland, but they didn't have the Orthodox faith. They didn't have the Orthodox Church. They didn't have the divine mysteries. So there's a disconnect. So you have to be connected to the experience in order to understand, truly understand those lives. You mentioned Father Seraphim Rose. I'm assuming that his survival course has been part of your reading in your whole formation, and
Yes.
and would you say that for our listeners that's required reading, if we're going to understand this question of Romanity versus modernity, post-modernity?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's so important to read Father Seyfried Rose's Orthodox Survival Course, and precisely for in order to understand modernity and post-modernity, and how the revolutionary spirit shaped the nihilistic form of society nowadays, of Western society, and how it affected the Orthodox Church as well, but the world, how it spread to the world, and how it determines our lives today, and how orthodoxy can be precisely the answer to that nihilistic way of life in society.
Can we give a definition for those who aren't familiar with it? Post-modernity, modernity, post-modernity, and its relation to nihilism. Is it just a softer, or is it just a form of nihilism ultimately, because there is no absolute truth for the modern man or for the postmodern man, or is there actually a distinction, a sharp distinction being made? What's the point of these categories with regard to these ultimate questions? Is there a substantial difference between the modern man, the postmodern man, the nihilist?
I think there are differences of degree, but especially from our perspective, I don't see a big substantial difference. I think postmodernity is a consequence of modernity, and of course it shows this complete loss of any referential truth, authority. This has been completely lost, whereas in modernity there were still some remnants of this. But from another perspective, I think that it's an interesting term, post-modernity, from the Orthodox perspective, precisely because, okay, we can see all the evils in the revolutionary spirit, but when we compare with what Father John Romanity said, we see that there's also some kind of providential opening there. With the French Revolution, with the American Revolution as well. And Father John Romanity spoke about the United States of Franco-Romania, that it was a possibility that through the evangelization of orthodoxy in the West, after this relative opening made possible by the revolutions, not because they were good, I'm not saying that. It's just what it is. It's a fact that the Catholic Church, the Papal Church, papism lost its authority through the rise of secularism. The Frankish monarchies as well. Of course, the main tendency was this worldly spirit, that even the descendants of the Romans in Europe and in America, after these revolutions, they didn't return to their original faith. They fell in this very nihilistic, comfortable, progressively comfortable way of life, very humanistic. But at the same time, the postmodern period shows that none of these idols, basically, human rights, democracy, freedom, can quench the spiritual thirst of man. And that's why we see, like you said in the beginning, in periods of crisis, that orthodoxy is a shining light for people with this spiritual thirst. And so there's also, I believe, a providential dimension here, which is really part of the mystery of the cross. I would say that because surely the revolutionary spirit is an expression fundamentally of the mystery of iniquity or the mystery of lawlessness. But as it happened in the life of the Lord, that the mystery of iniquity was operating against him, but this was transfigured through the cross, through the assumption of the effects of evil and death and sin in and by the cross. So I think this pattern repeats itself as well in moments of crisis, but in post-modernity. At the same time that there is this rise in the mystery of iniquity, this can be transformed through the power of the cross, I believe.
Yes, absolutely. And you see it again and again. And it's just like what we talked about with COVID. In spite of COVID, you see this massive missionary outreach and growth. And the same thing, I think what Father John saw, what we also see, and as an American, I feel it, I think it's real, is that there is an authenticity, a good disposition, a kind of salt of the earth, seeking after the true and the good and the beautiful among many in the West, in spite of being caught up in the endless pendulum swing of delusion from extreme to extreme, which characterizes the West for so many centuries, right? The loss of the royal path. I think that's another aspect of Orthodoxy and Romeo Cini, is that the royal path is maintained. And somebody say, well, okay, is that so important? That's essential. It's essential. That's exactly what was lost in the West. And you have one extreme and another, and you have an attempt to correct one extreme by going to the other extreme. And they're all human attempts. But in spite of that, in the West, you see a groundswell of people who really do want the truth. You know, they're getting fed so many lies, the fruit of so many centuries of lies about Christ and the church. And in spite of it all, they're crawling out from under the weight of all those lies and seeking the truth. And that, I think that's what Father John saw. He was, basically an Asia Minor American. He himself felt the pull of the American and the Western generally, the aspects that were still authentic. Can we talk a bit about just some terms before we go to questions? Because we're already about an hour and a half in, and some of these things that will help us to help the listeners navigate today. All right. So we've talked a little bit about the history of Romanity. We've talked about some of the differences with the West, some key differences in terms of experiential theology as opposed to academic. We've talked about the struggle for Romanity, the ethos of Romanity, the Eastern mentality and way of life. But there's terms that are thrown around and ideas that are thrown around that I think a lot of people don't initially understand. So we talk about, 2 Thessalonians 2 and that whole chapter, but especially 7, where we're talking about the mystery of iniquity. We're talking about the one who withholds. The katekon is the Greek. King James Version doesn't do justice at all to the Greek. Do you want to explain what that is? What do you think that is? I guess there's even different theories within Orthodoxy. What is the katekon, and why is it relevant to what's going on in the world today?
Yes. Yeah. So the consensus of the fathers says that the katechon, this was expressed, for instance, by Saint John Chrysostom, the katechon is the Roman Empire. Some other fathers, they speak about the prayers of the saints that withhold the mystery of iniquity as well. So I think that the combination of these two views is the Christian Roman Empire. It's Christian Romanity. And we see that this Christian Romanity, it had an end, a relative end, with the fall of Constantinople, and it's striking to see what happened in the West immediately after the fall of Constantinople, the Renaissance. I would also mention here this infiltration of an alien kind of spirituality in the Renaissance thinkers, which is mostly Jewish and Kabbalistic,
Yes.
and how it determined the development of as an undercurrent of the Western spirit. To some extent, we can see that there was an inheritance of the Roman imperial power in Russia, in the Russian Empire. Although I would say it's not the same, it wasn't the same. I don't agree with the idea of a third Rome. We don't see saints, as far as I'm aware, that really defend this idea of third Rome. But to some extent, we can see that it was a Christian power, a Christian political power, sovereign. So in that sense, we can see it as a cataconic power as well. And indeed, if we look at the geopolitical stakes that developed through modernity up to the First World War, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the formation of the Soviet Union, mainly what is called the Great Game between the British Empire and Russia, or the Russian Empire, that it was a conflict between the forces of the mystery of iniquity and the cataconic forces that were preserved in Russia. It had a geopolitical dimension as well, because the destruction and or at least the subversion of the Russian Empire was the main goal of British imperialism, centered in the city of London, with this as the basis of a financial power that had also the same component and of this spiritual undercurrent that I mentioned before. But with the Bolshevik revolution, the Russian state, the Russian Christian state, was dissolved. This coincided with the Balfour Declaration that legitimized and gave rise to, or fulfilled the objectives of Zionism. So we see a confluence of the mystery of iniquity in that period, in the First World War. Also, with other,
just to take what you said, forgive me, just don't lose that thought, but just take what you said. The fall of Constantinople and what happened after is the fall of the Tsar Caesar for the Russians, and what happened afterwards. The 20s were an unbelievably destructive period for the Orthodox around the world, not only with gross persecution, but distortion and division that was created largely by those same forces that you're talking about within the Orthodox Church outside of Russia, such that you would have a recognition from Constantinople of the living church and not the saint who was in house arrest. Just give you one example. So you have immediately, I think there is, because it's a type of and it's pointing to God, the power of Caesar, even though if it's not the Roman Empire or a third Rome, it's the type of the Christian leader, monarch, and he's pointing to God. So the fact that there was constant calls by the saints for the people to come back to God leading up to the revolution and the apostasy, they really felt that it was because of the apostasy of the masses that led to the death of the Tsar. So these things are inseparable. It's both and, like you were saying, it's both and on both the negative and positive side of that question, right? But both and that's that. What is the katechon? It's the Roman Empire, but it's not just the Roman Empire. It's the prayers of the saints. And what is the loss of the katechon? It's not just the type, the power, the authority invested in the czar. It's the apostasy of the people that then brings it the end of the inversion, really, of monarchy, right? So I think that's hugely obvious if you're just judging from the fruits of the 20s for not just the Russian church but the entire Orthodox Church.
Yes. And another thing that happened during that period was the Greek genocide. There was this attempt at exterminating all remnants of Romanity, both in Russia and in the Rum peoples of the East. And we still,
in many ways, we're still living the fruits of the 20s.
Yes, absolutely. It's yes, we're in the same timeline. Especially from the First World War, it hasn't the geopolitical stakes are the same. The struggle for Constantinople remains. There are many things that haven't changed.
Yeah, absolutely. So the katechon, I think we defined that. We've pointed to that. Do we see? I think if we did a whole live stream on the prophecies of the saints, from Saint Cosmas to Saint Paisios and even to Elder Ephraim, there seems to be faith, belief, vision that we're going to see o katechon, a force for good, a worldly authority that's going to come back.
Yes.
And we're going to see that return for a time. Mm-hmm. Have you studied that at all, the prophetic literature?
Yes. I have faith in this, and I have hope in this. And of course, we see that. So the katechon lives potentially in Romanity, in what remains of Romanity today, in the Orthodox Church, in the political ethos of the Orthodox Christians. And I think it depends, like the saints say, it depends on our repentance and our life of prayer, and that this return of the katechon may be accomplished again.
The question of anomia, of course, the Greek word for iniquity or lawlessness.
Yes.
I heard you in another podcast talking a lot about that. In particular, within the context of the West, the Kabbalah and all of the fruits of that in the West, that this is a conscious. I was fascinated by the idea that there was a conscious belief among certain aspects of Zionist, I guess you would call them Zionist, from the hundreds of years ago going on. What are they called? The particular group of Jews? The Sabbateans, right? So they were following in the footsteps of a supposed Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
And what was curious to me was, even though he died and obviously wasn't the Messiah, nonetheless, this group continues on to this day.
Yes.
They're still conscientiously a force, or maybe the force within Zionism.
Yes, I would say so, because they are completely messianically oriented. Their whole life is directed to the hastening of the messianic age from the Jewish perspective, and they believe that they can accomplish this through what they called, or some Jewish scholars called, the redemption through sin. That the intensification of sin and the production of chaos and apostasy will lead to the coming of the Messiah as a savior figure from this apostasy.
It kind of reminds you of the dispensationalists and among the certain Protestant groups, that we're going to work for those who deny Christ in order to usher in the return of Christ.
Yes, dispensationalism is it was a result of this. It's a
right. It's a fruit
it's
of it.
a fruit and a subversion of Protestant Christianity in accordance with the goals of Zionism.
And is that I mean, is that considered something that appeared in like the 17th century, 18th century, or do we have roots going back to the Talmud, and it's just an extrapolation of what was always there?
Yeah, I would say so. It's you can see it. You can see it already in the Talmud, but this specific strand of Judaism really realizes those aspects of Judaism that were always there, but now become very explicit and deliberate.
And we have a very small thread of, I guess, Orthodox Judaism, which is quite opposed to this idea, and they believe that God has to bring them back, and that humanly they should not work for it. But they're probably a tiny group with regard to that today.
Yes, it's true, but it's a minority indeed.
Yeah. So that they're consciously committing evil in order to provoke, let's say, the return, the need for, or the, I mean, how do they understand it? If there's just general disorder and destruction, therefore humanity would be forced to accept an order, which would be their Messiah.
Yeah, but it's basically that they have their own spiritual, metaphysical justifications for that. It's a bit complicated. I don't know how interesting it is to.
Yeah, really... no, okay. I'm trying to get my head around this mystery of iniquity with regard to those forces that are consciously working for. I mean, obviously, the mystery of iniquity, according to Paul, is broader, and it has to do with, I think, first and foremost, the apostasy of those who call themselves Christians. Because my understanding is that one of the reasons why we can't speak of the time of the second coming is because it depends on the faithfulness or apostasy of Christians, and and so therefore it's regulated. I mean, that's the yeast. That's the that's what the world exists for, that purpose, for those to be sanctified and saved. And when that no longer is the case, when you have a church that's been turned to the world, that is the spirit of Antichrist that now rules the world, right? There is no difference between secularism and the spirit of Antichrist. So, and that doesn't happen forcefully from outside. No matter how many people want to choose it and hate Christ, they can't force Christians to give him up. So it's ultimately in the hands of the Christians. Even the demons can't force us to. We have to listen to the demons. We have to listen to the Antichrist. So that's the broader question of the mystery of iniquity at work. Part of that, right?
But one interesting aspect of Sabbateanism is that they infiltrate deliberately other religions. The Sabbateans initially, after the apostasy of their Messiah to Islam, they became Muslims. They were the predecessors of the Don May, that were really for instance, the Young Turks or descendants. Many of them were Don May. They were crypto Jews, and and
they were in Thessaloniki largely, weren't they?
Yes.
Not?
Yes.
Yeah. And so we also know that Ataturk was one of them.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting. Ataturk from Thessaloniki, one of them, and they eventually helped to bring him. Was he? Do we believe Ataturk was a Jew? Or was he a Jew?
There's yeah. There are reasons to believe that he was a Jew, a crypto Jew.
That's
or at least a descendant of these Don May Turks.
These
but
are
then,
these are hidden. I mean, don't make, just for those who don't know, these are those who are Jews but act as if they're Muslim and play the Muslim.
yes, that's it. And in the West, it was the Frankists, the so-called Frankists, that also became Catholics, mostly in Poland and the Baltic states, but also in some places of Russia as well. But there were many, can I say, Sabbatean networks that made residence in England, in London, for instance, and that, based on the work of many serious researchers, we can see that they were at the origin of many rites of Freemasonry. So that there was this, can I say, presence and influence of Sabbateanism specifically in the development of Freemasonry. And
How about the Illuminati? How about the Illuminati? They have play in the
yes,
Illuminati as well.
yes, so there were different like paramasonic lodges. The Illuminati were one of them. It's interesting to see that there were Freemasonry from that period, from the 18th century, had this this duality between the conservative Freemasons and the progressive Freemasons. Mostly the conservative were the so-called Rosicrucians, and the progressive were the Illuminati. But the funny thing to see is that they had many, their grandmasters sometimes were the same in these lodges. So some authors get stuck in this dialectic between the conservative Freemasons and the progressivist Freemasons. But you see that higher up they were always connected, led by the same people.
Talking about Freemasonry, I know I heard you talk about René Guénon, of course, a very important figure in the critique of modernity, even if he was ultimately a Sufi and a traditionalist and not an Orthodox Christian. He had a good critique, and it's not hard for one well versed in philosophy and the West to understand and critique these things. I mean, he did it exceptionally well. But my question, I guess, with Guénon and the traditionalist movement, because it's been I think it's very much more influential than we think. And I think there are a lot of converts to Orthodoxy through that. Some of them are still traditionalists, so-called traditionalists. But my question is, I mean, he was a Mason before he became a Sufi Muslim. And how much of that never left him? Because in some aspects, traditionalism seems very Masonic to me.
Yes. Yeah, he was a Mason until the end of his life, and he
Really?
up to the end of his life, he tried, because he was very idealistic with regards to Freemasonry. And there are people that make this mistake. Of course, he was a Muslim, but even some Orthodox Christians have some kind of positive view of Freemasonry, which is completely wrong, of course. But
I'm surprised that I mean, he might maybe never told the Sufi Muslims in Egypt that he was also a Freemason, because I can't imagine serious ones saying that that's compatible. But maybe Sufi Islam is much more quote unquote mystical and free in that sense. But what's your thinking?
The interesting thing is that there were many Sufis that were Freemasons also. There was yes, there was a communication. Yes, there's another figure, not so well known, maybe, called Henri Corbin, a French Iranologist. He was a kind of traditionalist, but he was told, he was living in Iran, and he was told by basically Iranian Sufis to become a Freemason, because the equivalent of Eastern spirituality in the West was Freemasonry. And there were many, how can I say, institutional connections. This was made possible mostly by British imperialism that established these lodges, and of course they had this idea that I know that you have criticized as well in your work, of the transcendent unity of religions,
Yes.
and which is indistinguishable from ecumenism ultimately, even if some of these people think that it's a more sophisticated form of ecumenism or something like that, but it's ecumenism comes from that because the root is ultimately is Freemasonic, and
I
I
mean,
would say,
go ahead.
Jewish.
You have to say that again. I think I lost you. That we had a connection. What was the last statement?
That this idea of the transcendent unity of religions is ultimately not only Freemasonic but Jewish.
So Kabbalah or where?
Kabbalah, yes, because any cursory study of Freemasonry sees that the basis of Freemasonry is Kabbalah.
Yeah. Yeah. So when I think of the future of religion, Father Seraphim Rose's famous book, and when I consider the writings of Elder Athanasios Mitilineos, we did 100 lectures, basically just presenting his thoughts on the Book of Revelation. The image that we have for the future of ecumenism, which according to Elder Athanasius will bring the Antichrist, ultimately, that's the function of pan-religious ecumenism. The only thing that's viable, because we're not going to have a institutional, physical unity of religions. We're not going to have the syncretism, because syncretism attacks identity, and identity, dissolves things. When you have a total loss of identity, things get dissolved, and they don't want the religions to be dissolved. They want them to be co-opted and used for the sake of the controlling of the masses. So syncretism is out for the masses because of that. And I think so. Therefore, the only thing that makes sense is that there will be a perennialist type of agreement of all the religious leaders, that they will, on some superficial level, as far as for Christians go. I think for other religions it's not nearly as problematic, but for Christians, the Christian leaders who will buy into this, they will have an out. And you already see that, actually, even within some Orthodox who converted but never really fully converted, never threw off their perennialism. You already see that there's this idea that, hey, there is ultimately Christ working within the religion. This is how a so-called Christian perennialist will try to reconcile things. It's the Logos working within the religions. And just like he did, the pre-incarnate Logos worked, and we have the, expectation of the nations. We have, the wisdom outside of the old covenant that's pointing to the coming of the Messiah among the nations. Well, so too we have the Logos working in the religions. The problem, of course, is that we now have the incarnate Logos who sits at the right hand of God the Father.
Yes.
And now the incarnate Logos will judge the earth and everyone within it. And the incarnate Logos is the one that's guiding the church. So within history, we can no longer talk about the Asarkos Logos or the pre-incarnate Logos working among the religions. That makes no sense. We now have the Logos working essentially against the incarnate Logos, who's calling all to unity in his body. No, these things are impossible to reconcile, and there's no church father who ever spoke this. So, but that's going to be the ultimate, end of the mystery of iniquity.
Yes.
Is going to be Christians who will say, not Christ is not true, but the religions are also true, which is essentially denial of Christ. Do you find that to be an accurate prediction or description?
Yes, I totally agree. Yes, I don't think I have anything to say, because yes, I totally agree.
And so that's what we have to be on guard against. And what Orthodoxy ultimately presents is a holistic Catholic, in the true sense of the word, balanced royal path answer to everything, right? There's nothing missing. There's no discounted version. There's no partial church. We don't have. We're not. This is the Protestant ecclesiology that's even, I think, taken over much of Catholicism. Even among the so-called traditionalists, they have aspects of this. They've lost the ancient ecclesiology, but the idea that there is no one body in time and space, which is the incarnate logos, the continuation and incarnation. That's almost a rarity today for people to believe that, it seems. And that is exactly what will, if we hold to that and understand that, we crucify our intellect, we're going to remain faithful to the end. And it requires, on one level, a crucifixion of the rational intellect, because it requires faith, it requires trust. But you can see that eroding even among many academic theologians, it seems to me, today.
Yes.
Anything else we want to add to the question of Romanity, post-modernity, and what we need to do to go deeper and to enter more deeper into this this phronema, this outlook, this reality? Just maybe even, I think what's been extremely helpful for me is just getting to know the reality of history, not living in delusion with regard to history is a huge antidote to the lies and the deception of today.
Yes, I think it's important to have this historical consciousness, and which is a Christian, how can I say, outcome as well, because history and eschatology is always connected. And in the cyclical conceptions of time in the pre-Christian religions, there was no real conception of history with an end, with a beginning and an end. And but at the same time, it's so important to have the historical consciousness that the Orthodox Church has, not the historical consciousness of the West that developed in the West, which is different. It's a different perspective on history.
So you're in Portugal, but many people are in Idaho or Kentucky or Texas, far from any Orthodox physical presence, right? We don't see I guess Portugal is also also pretty far from the centers, but I mean, in degrees, the further you go west, Australia, the further you get away from any physical manifestation of tradition, history, and it's a struggle for our contemporary convert. But we have to consciously understand, I'm a convert and I'm a part of this church, this Eastern Roman Orthodoxy, right? And I need to become a part of that, not just on some superficial and institutional level, but I need to understand that that's my heritage.
Yes,
I think that's a struggle for people, but I think it's essential.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and there's also an interesting or a beautiful notion from Father John Romanidis that he called orthodoxy the aristocracy of glory. And this surpasses ethnic identities and national identities and racial even, that we can be transfigured in the body of Christ. We don't lose our ethnic identity, but this identity is transfigured in the body of Christ. It's assumed and becomes sanctified, becomes glorified. And this, it's also a feature of Romanity, that it was able to gather many peoples under the umbrella of the ark of salvation, which is the church, and transfigure the ethnic identities. And still, we have this possibility nowadays.
It's always both and, isn't it, in Orthodoxy?
Yes.
not either or. So it's always, yes, I am a Greek from from the Peloponnesus, but I'm also a Roman, or I'm a Irishman, but I'm a, in a sense of orthodoxy, I transcend that. I'm not limited to that. I don't lose it, but I also am not limited to it.
Yes. And you see it in the Holy Mountain that they have many monks from different places in the world, but the ethos is the same. And
Yes.
it's you feel it there as well in the Holy Mountain.
This is the Catholicity. This is Catholicity, right? True Catholicity is this. When you go to Athos, or you go to Romania, or you go to Serbia, when you meet the holy strugglers in the monasteries, you feel the exact same spirit of God and the exact same ethos, whether it's in Serbian or Romanian or Greek or whatever it might be. Wherever there is that spirit of God, that Orthodox struggler that has made progress in purification, illumination, he expresses to you the mind and the ethos of the church. And would it be wrong to say that's Romanity in many ways, and that's what transformed and kept together the empire for 1,000 years as a Christian empire?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's that. Yes, that's the whole point. That's Romanity.
Right. And so that's our heritage. That's what we need to also struggle to have in practice. And it's so, all right, there's so much, as we're talking, there's other things coming to mind, like the whole struggle of the day. We'll have to come back and do another podcast, but the whole struggle of the day, which is very, very much felt, but also it seems almost imposed upon this generation of identity. The identity, the racial identity, the ethnic identity, the loss of these things, the challenge of these things, all of the question of immigration, all of this is also related. I mean, as Orthodox, how are we going to deal with all that? We're going to harken back to Romanity in many ways.
Yes. And
yes, because we're not going to do well with it. Yeah.
Yes, because I think we are too much affected by false dichotomies coming from the West, precisely. I mentioned one of them. It's conservatism versus progressivism. The left and right paradigms, because the Roman Empire never had colonialism, never had feudalism, never had this cult of authority. But these things are not inherently leftist. This is absurd. I mean, to go against those things. But it's a different worldview, and I think we should cultivate that perspective, that Roman Orthodox perspective that surpasses these false Western dichotomies that keep us stuck in this eternal pendulum between left and right, progressivism and conservatism. Of course, nowadays we cannot accept the things that come from the left. That the left has become a monstrosity. It doesn't mean that some people on the left, they don't have some degree of good intuitions or goodwill about certain things, but this is distorted also as a consequence of a reaction against the tyrannical aspects of the West. So it's understandable from a perspective, but these things are surpassed in Orthodoxy. These things don't exist in Orthodoxy.
Exactly. And the royal path. I mean, what I like to say many times, I've said this, I think it needs repeating. The devil always presents two options, and they're both his. Mm-hmm. Islam, Zionism, Republican, Democrat, communist, capitalist. This is this Protestant, Roman Catholic. This is what's been going on for 1,000 years, if not forever. And the Orthodox, if he's going to remain Orthodox and have Romanity, the royal path, he's going to stay on that path. He's got to avoid both ultimately, or not get sucked in. Not that he won't take from both or doesn't recognize on each side truth in the realm of ideas, but he can't identify with those. He can't become a belligerent antagonist for worldly identity ultimately,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
He's got to remain in standing and looking at the eschaton. Otherwise, he will lose his orthodoxy ultimately.
Yes. And
It's a
that's why,
huge trap. It's a huge trap for us today.
yes, for sure. And that's why I think it's very important to study, cultivate study the Roman sources, the Christian Roman sources, to understand what were the legal institutions of the Christian Roman Empire, the legal approach, juridical, all of these aspects, the culture, because these things, there is a historical, political, in that more originary sense that I mentioned, expression of orthodoxy in this symbiosis of orthodoxy and Romanity. And I think it's lacking. We lack this study, this culture. And again, I think we can learn it. We can see the living examples of this culture still existing in the East, like we mentioned.
Absolutely. All right. Because we're going at 2 hours and 10 minutes, we can keep talking forever. Let's open it up for questions. Let's go another half an hour if you've got the strength.
Yes.
We usually go about 3 hours every night. It's just never. The questions are many. We're not going to get to all of them probably, but people, if they want to ask questions, I mean, we could have taken this in many other ways. So I'm happy to answer questions that are off topic, but if you've got questions about the lecture, that would be the first thing I would go to. And we have a couple different platforms that, we've got 7 platforms that we're live streaming to. I don't know if our moderator, Gregory, can see the live stream in Telegram or on Rumble or anywhere else, because we don't get those questions automatically here. I'll start presenting these questions here, and we'll see if we can get to them all. Anybody who's not asked a question wants to do that, put the word question in all caps and submit it in the chat, and we'll star it, and then we'll present it. So first is our good friend Panayotis, and he says, Father John Romanides' famous booklet on this topic of the Romaico or Romios is Frank's Romans, Feudalism, and Doctrine. He gives the link there to archive.org. Thank you, Panayoti. Shout out from the Czech Republic. Nice to have you with us tonight. I've been amazed, Justino. I've been amazed by how many people in Europe are now purchasing Uncle Mountain Press books, especially the latest one that we put out, which is The Errors of the Latins, the 2-volume, 1,300 page. We published that thinking, well, maybe we'll see after a year or so, we'll see them sell out and we'll get the money back. And, it's just a massive book. Who's going to buy this today? And yet we're almost sold out after 2 months. And it's really phenomenal. And a lot of those purchases are coming from Europe, and they're paying as much for the shipping as they are the books themselves, unfortunately. So that's really encouraging. I don't know. I'd just like to share that with people because it's very encouraging. How can Orthodox today properly engage with the increasing racial politics that is becoming more prominent today with tradition, such as white nationalism and Orthodoxy, for example? I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, good question. It's a very, can I say, pressing issue. We see that there's a deliberate attempt at dissolving cultures and ethnicities and nationalities and national identities through massive immigration. This is not something organic. It's not something natural. It's a political process, and there's a huge distinction between a natural process of immigration and cultural transference and what's going on nowadays. What's going on nowadays is completely artificial. So I think there's strong reasons to what can I say, resist through different means this process of racial basically extermination of native cultures. But this is not, I would say, the center of. It's not. It doesn't define spirituality or the point of our life. I think it's very important to resist these processes, but people shouldn't get stuck with this. We should see beyond. We should see beyond this.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of young men, Orthodox included, who are very inspired by certain outspoken critics of the whole woke agenda or the whole international cabal with immigration. Basically through immigration, there's an obvious attempt to erode society, and in many ways create chaos. There's a lot of things that people are seeing through, and they're speaking out. And a lot of these spokesmen are not Orthodox. The vast majority are not Orthodox. They don't have an Orthodox consciousness, sensitivity, and they're buying in or they're promoting, a solution which does not include eternal life, does not include the Orthodox phronema. And you see Orthodox people getting excited about that. What would you say to them? How would you counsel them if you were to say, okay, why is that not a good idea, or how can that be done if it can be in an Orthodox manner, to be a part of those movements, to withstand the erosion of the UK and the British identity, fight against immigration. There's a lot of very urgent need on a basic level in communities because of violence, because of whatever. But how does an Orthodox person do it without getting sucked into a very unorthodox stance among these heterodox or these atheists?
Well, I think above all, we should cultivate Orthodox spirituality and this to keep our relationship with the spiritual father, and to be very alert, to be very discerning about these things, to keep this the interaction with these influencers and or movements at a minimum. That's my view. I think again there are many legitimate reasons to agree to some extent with these opinions, these ideas, these movements, but like you said, you shouldn't get sucked into this. It's very important to maintain our autonomy, our freedom, our spiritual freedom, not to get dragged by something that doesn't benefit us. But another thing that I would say is that I think that the real goal of these events of like massive immigration and dissolution of cultures through immigration is not it's not the abolition of nationalities themselves. It's the imposition of this system of the beast, basically, where everything is controlled digitally. It's a system of surveillance and total control over our actions, over our speech, over our thought. And the reaction against immigration, mass immigration, is desired, even to a violent point, is desired by the powers that be in order to impose the technocratic solution. So we should be very alert and always to keep this in our mind, that this is the end goal.
To have the big picture in mind, to have yes, exactly. This is what was lost again and again in the West. And people looked only at, well, this dogmatic question was wrong by this pastor, this preacher, this and now we're going to break off and create our own sect of Christianity because of losing sight of the past, the tradition, anything else. And so, from one generation to another, you just have dissolution, ultimately, tens of thousands of Christian groups. The same thing's happening, and this is really a political, machinations. The same thing's happening in terms of society. And so it's a on one level you say, well, I have to do something, I have to fight, I'll do this, but you don't understand that you're actually playing into the bigger picture, the bigger game, which is the totalitarian global. It's very. I mean, every day you can read something new about digital IDs, about central currency, about a whole slew of things. What's fascinating, and I like that you point this out, is that it doesn't seem that there's a global group of countries, leaders that are ultimately opposed to these things. They all seem to be on the same page, whether you're talking about the BRICS or you're talking about the West. Is there any, prominent leader, even among the Orthodox, who's saying no to the digitization and the, control grid?
No, I don't see it. Even in Russia, we see the same steps being taken, which is very sad. And many people are not aware of this, but it's true. There's, even in Russia, there's this it's moving forward with digital ruble. Many they're implementing many technological means of surveillance and control for movements, and so it's the same everywhere, and it's that's why it's important to seek what is the political dimension without getting into politics. That's not what I'm saying. The political dimension of orthodoxy and Romanity. What is this form of political way of life that doesn't exist anywhere else?
All right, let's open it. Go ahead.
Yeah. No.
Okay. I wonder if I'm so attracted by the writings of St. Isaac the Syrian because Syrian Christianity was not Hellenic. Well, Syrian Christianity was not Hellenic. Well, not like they weren't speaking Greek, but I don't know if you can say that they weren't heavily impacted by all the church fathers who did speak Greek, and I don't know if there's a lack of that. There's somehow a lack of the Spirit of God. Obviously, St. Isaac, contrary. By the way, we're bringing out a book, I hope soon. It's got a lot of editing still to do, but it's been translated, a very important book from Greek by Father John Fotopoulos about St. Isaac the Syrian, establishing St. Isaac again properly from a distorted vision and view of him today by certain academics. But in any case, totally Orthodox. So, I mean, the fact that he was a great hesychist, regardless of the Syriac Christianity, I don't think that's really plays a part. I don't know. I'm not sure why this is an issue. Do you?
Yeah, but because many of these saints, whether in the East or in the West, that were outside of the boundaries of the Roman Empire, they kept a relationship with the Romans always. You see it in, for instance, Saint John of Damascus. He was under Arab rule, nonetheless. He remained always in contact with the Roman Empire. So it seems to be slightly artificial, the distinction.
Right. Next question is this one here. Thanks. I guess you could say the biggest challenge for us in the West, Europe, is to rediscover what being a Western Roman actually means in an Orthodox perspective.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yes, I agree. But again, it's through the living contact with the current testimony and witnesses of Orthodoxy that we can learn what it is to be a Roman, what Romanity is. and that we can, through this contact, revive and revitalize whatever remains of Romanity in the West as well.
Do you agree that, I mean, strictly speaking, we shouldn't, that it's a misnomer to refer to the Latins as Roman Catholics?
Yeah, I agree. They're not Romans. They're not Catholics.
Right, exactly. People have a hard time understanding that because Romanity is not pertaining to the city of Rome. Obviously, it's pertaining to the whole Roman culture, experience, empire, and of course, the Christian emperor moved it to a Christian city and established a Christian city, and left the pagan Roman city behind. I don't think people realize just what that meant to the world at the time. Yeah. That the center of the empire now was, from beginning to end, a Christian city.
Yes.
It's just a phenomenal thing. When people say, "Oh, well, what's the big deal? What did Constantine do?" He reestablished the whole empire on a Christian basis. And when you came to the imperial city, you went from church to church and not pagan temple to pagan temple.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable, really, to think about what he did. It's phenomenal. Only with God's help could that have happened.
Yes, and in general on these issues, it's interesting. I would recommend the work of a historian, Anthony Caldelis.
Yes,
that he's at the front of this academic movement, scholarly movement, to reject the name of Byzantium applied to the East Roman Empire, and his work proves many of Father John Romanidis' points in academia. So it's fascinating to see that there's this big movement in academia, in intellectual authors and scholars, that proves many of the things that we discussed here today.
Mm-hmm. Should Orthodox people identify with Rome? I think he's misunderstanding exactly what we just said. That seems to be
with Romanity.
Rome, not the city, not papalism in Rome, but the Romanity, which is the identity, culture, phronema of being a Orthodox Christian during the Roman Empire, the 1,000 years of Romanity.
Yes, because
Romanity. Go ahead.
Yeah, because the Roman Catholic Church is a Frankish church that was imposed on the Roman peoples of the West, but it led to the loss of the real culture and ethos of Romanity that was preserved in the East.
It's good to remember that it was in 1009 that Pope Sergius IV introduced into his Confession of Faith the Filioque, and 1014 at the coronation of, I forget the name of the emperor. Do you remember the Frankish?
I don't remember exactly who he was, but he was
the one who was coronated. I forget the name, but he was basically asking for the Pope to include the Filioque, because that's what they had confessed for quite some time in Northern Europe. And so basically that's the beginning of what? That's the beginning of Catholicism as we know it. That's when they split off. They doubled down, right? They knew that the East rejected it. They knew that they were walking away from the councils that had gone before them, like the Eighth, and they didn't care. And they doubled down and they followed the political machinations and lead of those who were far from the Orthodox faith. And then they doubled down, tripled down in 1054. So, and a lot of that was under pressure, but also siding with the heretical filioquists in northern Europe. So that's the beginning of Catholicism. In other words, that's no longer orthodoxy. That's the departure. That's the identity.
Yes, now, and there's how can I say, a striking fact that precisely around that period of the schism, the popes, the bishops of Rome, became Franks. They were really ethnically Franks. Prior to that, they were citizens of Rome. They were Romans from Rome, and around exactly that period, in the beginning of the 11th century, they became Franks. Anyone can check this on Wikipedia.
Yes.
It's an amazing fact that people are not, you don't think so much about this, but it's striking.
It is striking because these same Franks had rejected the Seventh Ecumenical Council. They had rejected the Eighth Ecumenical Council. They had insisted on the Filioque, right? This was not like, oops, we made a mistake. This was a conscious decision. We're going another direction that we haven't gone for 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
We're departing from the rest of the church in the East, and we're going, a totally different direction. It was conscious. People say that the Orthodox, a lot of these papers will say the Orthodox revolted or whatever, protested. It's just historically, not only inaccurate, but it's just that they're historically inept and they don't know what they're talking about. All right, so Romanity is a huge mountain that our faith didn't move. I'm not sure what they mean by that. The split was the result of carnal ideology and human philosophy. I mean, I guess the split would have been with Catholicism is what they mean. Orthodoxy and the Roman Catholic Church are now in apostasy. Okay, so this is a Protestant maybe talking. I don't know who this person is. Yeah. What to say here? They don't even know what probably Romanity is if they are speaking of it in such a way. I'm not sure they understand what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the split was the result of both a loss of dogma and ethos. So he's not far from that. Human philosophy, dogma, carnal ideology. I guess you can say carnal ideology. It's based on a carnal way of life. Then they created an ideology.
Mm-hmm.
But that's Catholicism. That's what happened in the West. Orthodoxy and the Catholic Church are now in apostasy. I don't know. How can they both be in apostasy?
Yeah.
That doesn't even make any sense. Like, where's the church then? Protestants don't believe the Lord when he says, well, I will be with my church until the end of time, apparently. They don't believe that he was serious about that. I have a question about new and old calendar churches and receiving communion. I was denied communion in a new calendar church because I was baptized in an old calendar church. Can priests do that? Depends what old calendar church you're talking about. We have old calendar, those churches that are using or on the old calendar, like most of Orthodoxy actually is on the old calendar, the Russians, the Serbians, the church in Jerusalem, etc. Obviously, they're in communion. An old calendarist church, which has broken off communion, has no communion with the local churches, I would be surprised if they would bless you to go and commune in a so-called new calendars church. So maybe you need to understand that there's no communion unfortunately, between the old calendarists, the ones that have broken off, and now are in like 15 different pieces, unfortunately, and the so-called new calendar church, which is the local churches that have introduced the new calendar, which of course I think is an error. I mean, it's clearly not brought good fruit. It's caused disunity among the Orthodox, and we should not have that even on a liturgical level, but it's still in communion, and they're in the church. They're in the Orthodox church. They haven't broken off and gone their separate ways. So you just need to understand where you are and choose. And that's, yes, they can do that. If you're not a communing part of the church, member of the church, you have to one or the other. They're not in communion. I don't know if it's amazing how people don't pay attention to these things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have old calendarists in Portugal?
No, there is a schismatic church. Maybe they're old calendar, but they're not really old calendarists. It's not that.
There a new schism there? Something happened recently?
It's a strange situation. I'm not sure about that, but they were for a time. It was the first Portuguese community that became Orthodox. Indeed, now that I'm thinking, they had a connection with Greek old calendarists, but then they were under the Polish autocephalous church. But then, for some reason, they were excommunicated. I'm not sure about the situation there.
I see. Okay. Okay. Yeah, we've got a few more questions here. We're probably going to wrap it up here in about 10 minutes, 15 at max. Just the last couple questions. And we have one here. I don't know what this is. Let's see. This isn't a question, but I wanted to say how good this live stream is addressing these important topics. I'm also really happy to see an Orthodox Christian who is Orthodox like me.
He has a Portuguese name, so that's why he's saying that.
Okay, that's what he means. Okay. Father Peter, why Romanity? Paul in the epistles calls them only Jews and Greeks. What is Romanity? All right. So we kind of answered that early on. Maybe you missed it. Do you want to give them a quick definition of Romanity, Justin?
Yeah, Romanity is what we said. It's the ethos, the political, cultural ethos of the Roman Empire in symphony with Orthodox Christianity. Romanity itself was providential in the pagan phase, but then it reached its fulfillment, according to the fathers, by the conversion of the Roman Empire to Christianity, to Orthodox Christianity, and that's what we're speaking when we speak about Romanity.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Looking if there's any more questions. I don't see any. See if we have any over here, and we don't see any there. And Gregory, you don't have any more questions for me as well, right? So we're good. Let me just have there's one last question. It's kind of off topic. We can take it, but it's a little off topic, but we'll take it. Where is it? Where did it go? This is here. So could we get a class or lecture on what to think of the MP now and the reunion of ROCOR with it in 2007? I don't think I don't plan on doing a class on that, just on that. I did a 10-week course on the new martyrs. I touched on of Russia, and we touched a lot upon the principles laid down by the new martyrs with regard to Sergianism and the living church. And so in those lectures, we talk about the things that had arose then and how the church dealt with it then. So if I go into this reunion in 2007, which I wasn't a part of the discussions, I wasn't a part of the dialogue between the fathers from ROCOR with the Moscow Patriarchate, but beyond that, I was supportive of this because I knew that ROCOR, I believed that ROCOR would continue a strong witness to the whole question that needed to be addressed within the Moscow Patriarchate with regard to the new martyrs and what happened. I mean, there needs to be a reckoning. There needs to be a serious synodical, that's what the new martyrs called for, a council. Council of all the bishops, actually, is what they called for to deal with these questions that had arisen. And Sergianism was a Caesaropapism, a heretical ecclesiology, ultimately. And they wanted the church and council to deal with it. And that's how they left it. A lot of them were martyred, and that's how they left the question. That hasn't happened. And I think that's unfortunate. I think we have to deal with all of these questions, the old calendar question, ecumenism especially, but even these, that which was so difficult for the Russian church has to be dealt ultimately in an Orthodox fashion and manner, and that means a church council. That's how they were always dealt with. Committees are fine, but the committees aren't going to solve it for a lot of people, and they're going to bring a Catholic total answer to it. So that would be my short answer to you. What do I think about that? But I don't think that having unity and being in communion means that everyone is ipso facto a heretic, because there are some bishops, let's say in the Moscow Patriarchate, who refuse to, change their ideas in mind about the role and the place of Sergius. That's not how it works. There's been there's been heretical people teaching who were never formally rejected by the church. Maybe they died teaching heretical ideas, but they were never formally defrocked, anathematized, and therefore the mysteries were never doubted because the church gives the mysteries, Christ gives the mysteries, in spite of the errors or the delusions of priests and bishops. The question has to be dealt considerably. That's the only way these things are solved. So that would be, I mean, the short answer for me of what happened or what should ultimately happen with regard to the Russian church. But I'm also not a Russian speaker. So to take on that question would be a challenge for me. I mean, there would be Russians who would say, you're ignorant of this, you're ignorant of that. And therefore, it's a little bit of a challenge. I don't think I can do that. This is another one. Let's see. Has ROCOR continued to address issues in Russia church now? I don't know what ROCOR is doing in Russia. I think there's a lot more that could be done. I think there's criticism of what's been done, and I think there are bishops in ROCOR who are not happy with the total witness since the union. But you need to look at each case one by one and not generalize. That's what I think, and I'm not responsible for a lot of that, so it's hard to opine on it. What about adopting language and philosophy for Asian societies? How does Romanity fit in here? Mm-hmm. The principles of Romanity, right?
Yes.
How would you express that? I mean, what's the key? That's just missionary Orthodox work. You go to a country like, say, Innocent, Alaska, Father Cosmas of Grigoriou, and you you translate, the services into the local language. The question is, are we doing missionary work? I don't think it's a question of. I mean, it's a question of Romanity, but first and foremost, it's a question of what's the Orthodox mission theology, right? And stance.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't think it's a mystery. We know what we need to do. The question is to do it. And that's up to each one of us in time and space. That's the problem is we have to become virtuous. That's what's missing. All right. I think that's enough. I don't think the other questions are not always on topic. Thank you very much for taking so much time out of your schedule. It's a joy for us to have you on the stream to do this together today. Hopefully we'll do it again. There's a lot more we can discuss, and look forward to hearing the news of your work, publications, whatever you're going to be engaged in. We would love to be the recipients of the fruit of your work. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Father Peter, for the opportunity to speak about these very important issues, I would say.
Amen. All right, folks, from Greece, from the mountains outside of Thessaloniki, we will sign off. We'll see you not Tuesday. If you notice the schedule, there's no class on Tuesday, but God willing, next Thursday, we'll be back with the Mystery of Christ. What is today? No, this Thursday with Mystery of Christ, and then not Tuesday, and then the following Thursday. We will come back with the lecture, God willing, on the Mystery of Christ this Thursday. We'll see. We'll be in touch. Thanks so much. Good night.
Still